Now, a couple of weeks back, we spoke to a lovely lady called Carmel Doyle, who was involved in a study of children up to the age of 18 with intellectual disabilities. It was a very interesting study. And to follow on from that, we now have Eilish Burke, who is involved in a study of aging and intellectual disability in adults. Eilish, you're very, very welcome to Disability Matters.
Thanks very much, John. Delighted to be here.
It's great to have you back. You came a couple of years ago, and you came last year also.
That's
so
right.
You're an old friend.
Indeed, settling in here now nicely.
Right, I might ask you, where did the study come from?
Well, our study is the IDS-TILDA study. So it's the other end from what Carmel looks at. So we started out in about 2007, and it was Professor Mary McCarran who started it after the main TILDA study. You might have come across Professor Roseanne Kenny, who does the general population TILDA study. Well, we're a small sister of that. So we're the IDS-TILDA study, so Intellectual Disability Supplement to the Irish Longitudinal Study on Aging. Now, we are part of the global suite of aging studies across the whole world. It all started in the United States many, many years ago, back in the 1990s. And when Professor McCarran looked at all of these, unfortunately, none of them specifically included people with intellectual disability. And we knew from small studies that people with intellectual disability were aging differently. And it actually is quite a phenomenon. It's only in the last few decades that we actually see people with intellectual disability aging. And that's really attributed to better health care and better social care. But like, for example, say people with Down syndrome, back in the 1930s and 40s, they didn't live past their childhood. And then things improved. And by the 1960s, they were living into their 20s and maybe 30s. Now we have people with Down syndrome living well into their 70s, which is a wonderful success.
Absolutely.
However, it does bring its challenge. Yeah. So it does bring...
Tell us then, how many people were involved in the study and what was the gender split?
Okay, so what we did was we looked at how would we sample people with ID, or how would we access and recruit them. So in Ireland, we've got a disability database, and we've got one part of it, it's called the NAS, one part of it specifically collates data on people with intellectual disability. So if you want to be in receipt of services, you register with the database. So we were able to access the database, we got permission, and we randomly sampled 10% of people with intellectual disability in Ireland. Now, that was fine. The gender split is there's a bit more women than men, but we've got about 55% women to 45 men in our study. But the challenge is that we are sampling people who are on the database. But we know from looking at the census that there is a lot more people with intellectual disability in Ireland that are not registered, so we don't know about them. Yeah. There is different, but our sample comes from the database, and that was really, it was convenient because we could access it and we could recruit people through services.
Excellent. And what was the age range?
So we start, those longitudinal studies that I was talking about, they all start around the age of 50.
Okay.
And we looked at people's aging and people with ID, and we identified that people with intellectual disability tend to present with older age conditions at a much younger age. So we came down 10 years and we started at the age of 40.
Very good. And did you have families and parents involved?
Mm-hmm.
And if so, what did you get from them?
Okay, yeah, it's families and parents are really important in our study. We do a specific arm of the study that collects data from the carers. So we invite people who live at home, we ask them, can we interview their parents or their carer? So it might be a sibling, whatever. And once we get that permission, we offer a survey to them and invite them to take part. We have, I think it was around 70 or 80 people living at home originally. That's improved, that's increased in the time of the study. So that was back in 2007, 2008, into 2009 and 10. So that's when it took us ages to get through ethics. We had to go through, because of course people weren't familiar with this, with the study and all the rest. So it took a long time to get ethics through. We had to go through 147 different ethics committees.
Wow.
So it took ages to actually get going, because it was quite a new phenomenon within the field of intellectual disability, this big research study. But as I said, one arm of it is parents and family. And of course, you've got, as people with intellectual disability are aging, so too are their parents. So we have a lot of older adults who are being cared for by older parents. And that was a different shift, because previously parents would have outlived the child with an intellectual disability, whereas now things have turned. What people were telling us was that they were, I suppose one thing that came out of the data was the unimaginable love that people have for their sibling and their child. And it's that love that really keeps them going. However, they did say that the supports that are there are not sufficient. The respite is not sufficient. Respite in Ireland can be like a postcode lottery. It depends where you are, and you can have a better respite services. People did talk about, the burden on themselves, their own health suffered. I did a number of interviews, and without naming any names, I can give you some examples. I remember meeting a gentleman, and he had left his job to mind his brother because his own mother, who used to do the minding, had also got ill. So he was minding his mother and his brother. And it really impacted, he lost his connection with his own community because he gave up his job. So he really felt that pressure. And I can remember being in the house, and it was so warm, and it was a wonderful interview. But I came out that evening, and it was out in the country. It was pitch black, and that's what really struck me, that I was leaving them. I was getting into my car. It was about 4:00 on a winter's evening. It was pitch black, but there was nothing around. So they were isolated, and I just thought that could be very lonely, a lonely existence. So the supports, I think we could do better. It is improving, and I do see improvements, but I think we could do much better.
Yeah, big time. One of the biggest bugbears I won't even call it a bugbear, one of the biggest problems for parents of children with disabilities is what happens to them when I die. And it's a massive problem.
It is a lot. And again, I came across people, I remember one family, and they were struggling to mind their brother because the parents had always done the minding. And his sister, she said, I don't know what to do for him. He lost his parents. The parents died suddenly. But he not only lost his parents, he lost his home, because he had to move out of the home into his sister's home. She was trying to mind her own young family. And so she was quite stressed. And because she said her parents always took care of them, that she said she felt at a total loss. And she knew he was suffering, but he was grieving. He was grieving for his home, his parents, and then discommoded into a new situation, and no fault to him. He wasn't happy, but his sister was doing her best. So, it's the preparation. I think older parents do need to think about the preparation. And I've got colleagues who research in this specific area, and it is difficult. Maybe it's an Irish thing. We don't like to talk about death or what will happen in the future, or we parcel it up and that'll be it. But it's something that we should be discussing, because it makes life easier for ourselves. If I had a child that I needed support in the future, I know I'd be happy if things were sorted beforehand. But a lot of the times parents find that very, very difficult.
Yeah.
And it is, it is a difficult thing to talk about.
Absolutely. And absolutely, you should talk to everybody about death. What it means and what it means when the person is gone and how to recover from that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And the unfortunate thing for people with intellectual disability, a lot of the times they're not told, or they're protected, and people think it comes from a good place. They don't tell them that maybe the parent is dying or whatever. And that it can be hugely discommoding or challenging and stressful for the person with intellectual disability.
So tell us, the people who got involved in the study, were they very forthcoming with answers to your questions?
Well, we interview people with intellectual disability directly.
Yeah.
So what we do is we set up our interviews to support the person to take part as best they can.
Right.
So we've got different levels of intellectual disability. Some people have a mild ID and they can chat away and answer the questions themselves. So that's a kind of a face-to-face independent interview. Then other people with maybe more moderate to severe might need help, or they just might be anxious and they might need their family member or their key worker with them. So that's a supported interview. And then for people with more profound intellectual disability, if they have no verbal language, we like to interview them face to face, but they would need someone to answer on their behalf. So that's a proxy interview. But the proxy has to be someone who knows them really, really well. So it's like their parent or their sister or their key worker, somebody who's been with them for at least 6 months or more, who would know the nuances of what their preferences would be.
That's important, yeah.
Oh, very important, yeah.
And tell us, were any of the people involved in the study living independently?
Yeah, we have a lot of people living independently. Now that has changed. It's amazing how things have changed over the time. So we started out, as I said, in 2007. Our first big interview, our big report was 2011. By the time we got through all the ethics and all that. And at that time, we had, I think, around 40-50% of people were living in residential or institutional type living.
Yeah.
Now, around that time, Ireland changed its strategy. They adopted the congregated settings report, the strategy that stated we must move on from these congregated settings and into the community. Now, I can't remember now the figures exactly, but it was a very small proportion of people that were living independently or at home. As time has moved on, we see a huge shift. We now have the residential or institutional living has gone from about 50% to around 5 to 6%. So that's a big shift. Those people have moved out into community group homes. And then, of course, as time has gone on, we've lost a lot of people. We lost about 200 people in total from the study. They passed away. So we do a commemorative ceremony. We did one last year. We do one every couple of years to just remember people who have contributed and who've passed away. So over the time, we lost around 200, maybe a little bit more. So in the meantime, we've re-recruited. So we've invited new people, particularly the younger age group, because it's more than 10 years now. So the 40 to 50-year-olds have aged on. So we've invited new people. And those younger age groups are predominantly living at home or independently within the community. So it's great to see that.
Fantastic thing.
It is fantastic to see. Yeah. Now, in saying that, there are people who need more supported care. And I think that small pocket of people residential are, generally speaking, more with people with more profound intellectual disability and more complex health needs.
Right.
It's a lot of the time it's complex health needs that kind of determines the higher levels of support that people need.
So if we get into the people in the study, 40 for people with no intellectual disabilities, all about relationships with family, with siblings, with the opposite sex, etc.
Yeah.
How did you find that?
That I've got a colleague, Darren McCausland, and this is his particular area that he
Right.
researches. And what we've seen over time is good improvement. So initially, there were very few people who had a relationship. I think out of our total sample in wave one, that was 752 people, one person was married.
Ah,
Nobody had children. So now we see a shift, and we've got a number of people married. We've got a number of people with relationships and more meaningful relationships. Of course, our laws and stuff have changed completely.
yeah.
So what year was it that they got rid of that we brought in the human rights, we adopted our human rights policy, and they got rid of those old Victorian
Yeah.
things that determined that or said that people with intellectual disability weren't allowed to get married, they weren't allowed to have sexual relationships, they weren't allowed own property. And they only went, I think it was 2018 that went.
Yeah.
And they dated back into the 1800s. But we're seeing great improvement in that area. Still not the equivalent of the general population, but it is improving. Where we see improvement as well is the connections, the community connections, and people kind of integrated or engaged in more community activities in clubs and things like that, because previously in residential they wouldn't have been out in the community and involved in sports clubs or I don't know, knit and nat, those types of
Yeah.
community clubs that you'd see. So yes, there is a good improvement. It's still not as good as what we would like to see,
Yeah.
but it is get there. I figures wise, I don't have figures on the
Don't
top of my
mind
head
them. Don't
because
mind them.
it's not my area of research, but it is very much a huge part of our study, because I always think of the person as a whole. When you're taking care of someone or when you're thinking about a person, you have to think of the holistic approach, and you can't just think of social. You have to think of the biopsychosocial, so that those social determinants are just as important in our lives to ensure that we live healthy, happy lives as going to the doctor and making your appointments and getting your assessments and all those kind of things.
I think it's a fantastic thing that people are out there getting relationships, getting married, etc. And the
Yes.
children thing could be a medical thing, could be decisions that they made themselves. Who knows?
Who knows?
But I'm sure if you keep in touch with that study, there will be one at some stage.
we'll see it, and what we're hoping to do is continue. We've actually gone out to the field for wave 6, so we collect data every 3 years. So this is wave 6 that has just started. So this is 25, 26, 27. We should be reporting in 2028.
Wow,
around that time.
that's fantastic.
So that'll be our next drive.
What about jobs?
Employment is not good. There is some improvement, but it's still not good. So what we've seen is out of our total population, around 6 to 10% are employed. A lot of the times it's part-time.
Yeah.
But paid meaningful employment is challenging for people with intellectual disability. We have seen improvement. There's been lots of schemes and supports. Some employers are fantastic.
Yeah.
And if people are trained and supported, and a lot of people will have jobs coaches who will support them, they really work. It works really, really well for them, and they can function really well out in their community. Because if you don't have a job, you haven't got an income, and a lot of the times, if people are living at home, though, their disability is almost subsumed into the family income, And with a disability income, you can only work a certain amount of hours or it impacts on it. So people are reluctant to try and get a full-time job, because even with a full-time job, it probably will be the lower paid and the lower paid job, and you just wouldn't have enough income to survive. Like, the cost of living nowadays is so expensive.
I thought that part-time jobs are perfect because you can keep all your benefits.
You can keep on to your
Yeah,
benefits and your
which is
disability,
brilliant.
yeah.
And
Which
tell
is
us
great, and
then,
it's lovely to see that. You know, it's lovely
yeah,
to see people getting out and integrating in like that.
yeah, it's fantastic. And as you said, there are some very, very good employers in that area.
Yes.
What about health issues? What kind of percentage of people that you spoke to had health issues
Yeah,
in general? Like,
this is the challenging part.
yeah,
Um, in overall in the study, and this is looking back over 10 years, when we started out, about 72% had multiple morbidities. So that's 2 or more chronic health conditions. That figure hasn't changed. In 2023, in our wave 5, we had the same figures, around 72%. That's quite a proportion of people.
wow,
What we did see was that women were emerging with higher health needs, and particularly, like, associated with menopause.
right,
And that was something that was emerging. I've got a PhD student who's investigating the menopause and sort of mental health and symptoms and presentation. And what she's finding is that a lot of people aren't hugely aware of what
right,
menopause is.
yeah,
So it does contribute to poor health. Other conditions that we do see highly are things like gastrointestinal conditions.
right,
So people with gastric reflux and chronic constipation, mental health conditions, epilepsy, dementia, and musculoskeletal health is
yeah,
quite poor. That picture is very different to the general population.
of
In the
course,
general population, the big ticket item is cardiovascular. Now, I'm not saying that we don't see it. We do see cardiovascular disease, and we also see high proportions of the contributing risk factors like obesity and sedentary behaviour. However, people with intellectual disability the percentage is not as high. The prevalence is not as high. I could see in time to come that they will catch up. However, we're looking at this, and it's interesting. One of the things that we're thinking about is stress, and the stress in people's lives that contribute to things like stroke and heart attack.
yeah,
People with intellectual disability don't have the same stresses. They are stressed. They have their own little stresses, but they don't have the big stresses like mortgages and
yeah,
getting your children to through school or college, or paying big bills and things like that.
very
So
good,
there is a difference. So the patterns are different. My own area of research is bone health, specifically osteoporosis. And I've objectively measured bone health, and it's very, very different than what we see in the doctors reported. So when we ask people about their health, we ask them to refer to their doctor's file and tell us as accurately as they can if they've got all this. We have a big list of different conditions. So bone health is one. And one of the things that I did notice with osteoporosis is we don't have a high proportion of people attending for DEXA screening. Now,
oh,
a lot of people, everyone should be going for their DEXA when they're 50, and I think the general recommendation is for women at 50, or if they're premenopausal, menopausal, and for men around 60. But what I'm seeing is there's no gender difference for people with intellectual disability. So I'm getting high prevalence in younger men and younger women. One of the things that I'm identifying is that they don't attend for DEXA screening. But then if you go by the guidelines, they wouldn't be attending. I think one of the big contributing factors that I identified was the high level of medication people are on and the high prevalence of conditions like epilepsy that contribute to poor bone health. So, for
Right.
example, people on particular medications for their epilepsy, and that contributes to poor bone health. And the reason I hone in on epilepsy specifically is because we've got about a 38% prevalence, and that compares to less than 1% in the general population. So there's a big, big difference. But one of the things in relation to the DEX, I had a master's student who looked at why people weren't going for their DEXA. And what she identified was that people have great difficulty accessing it. There was
Oh,
only one DEXA scan in the country that had a hoist to help people be lifted onto if they had difficulty in mobility. So about 60% of people had difficulty with mobility. Then another percentage, about I think it was around 65% of people had what we call behaviours of concern or challenging behaviour. They just wouldn't be able to lie still for half
yeah.
an hour.
Yeah.
It just wasn't. And they had a lot of anxiety and maybe fear around going in for this assessment where you'd have to lie still. So we've actually just finished a feasibility study on a new device called an Ecolite, and we've identified it being feasible for 95% of people who took part in the study. And the Ecolite device is the equivalent of a DEXA.
Yeah.
It's portable. You can bring it into somebody's house. You can do their scan on their hip and their vertebrae, and you can get their T-score. So it's been accepted as a diagnostic machine. And we've done our feasibility. We brought it to the Irish Osteoporosis Society, and they've now endorsed it to be used for people with intellectual disability.
Wow.
But you know what? It's absolutely transferable. I think of maybe older adults or the elderly in nursing homes who mightn't be able to get out and have the bone health screened. This would be ideal because you can just bring it in. We had one lady and she had, as I said, those behaviours of concern, and she wouldn't leave her house. And we went into the house, we went into her bedroom, and she allowed us do the scan. And she was successful in getting it. And we identified that she had osteoporosis. So she was able to be started on treatment. And so it was wonderful. It was wonderful for her to actually get a proper assessment. So I think that kind of speaks volumes for the success of this. So more research in the area. I've secured funding, and I'm buying another machine to include it in IDS-TILDA.
Very good. What about things like exercise?
Oh, unfortunately, what we're seeing is exercise is not great.
Right.
The sedentary behaviour. So sedentary behaviour is sitting for more than 3 hours a day. I think we're all pretty much sedentary. We sit in front of televisions and laptops and screens and stuff.
Yeah.
But sedentary behaviour was up in the regions of about 86%.
Oh,
Yeah, people
that's not good.
No, you need
That
to get up.
contributes to health issues and so on.
It contributes to huge health issues. Any movement is good movement. We should be up moving at least once every hour. I have a little thing on my watch that gives me a little buzz to say get up and move. I think everyone should have one of them.
Yeah.
It just reminds you, because you can get hooked in and you're into doing things and you don't think about it, and next minute 2 hours have passed. But for people with intellectual disability, they do need supports.
Yeah.
So they need their family and their key workers to help them engage in meaningful activities, things that will render good health benefits. It's nice to go for a wee walk and
Yeah.
go round to the coffee shop and all the rest, but we need to actually engage in physical activity that you accrue health benefit from. So that means that you have to kind of exert yourself a bit. So get involved in make yourself sweat, I always say. But it's getting involved in things that you like. Dancing is a great one, and I love dancing. Is a lovely community endeavour, and it's a nice, where people get, it's fun and there's music, and I think it's just one of the ones that I always recommend, because I'm not a gym bunny. I wouldn't be going steps or what you call the machines, the rowing
Yeah,
machines
yeah.
and all that. No, I wouldn't be into that. But getting out and about into nature and getting involved in your community group, maybe dancing and stuff like that, it's much better fun. And it's also socially engaging. So it's much better fun for your mental health and your psychological health, because you're networking, you're meeting people, you're chatting, you're having a laugh. And do you know what? That's one of the best things in life, is have a
Of
good laugh.
course. Have a
Yeah,
laugh. I advocate for it all the time. Wind
yeah,
someone up, but not in a bad way. Get them laughing.
yeah. That's it.
My last question, and this study is going to end at some stage.
Hmm.
When will it, and what's next?
When will it end? Oh, like we never want it to end. But these things have a life. But they have a life to transform. One of the big things that we're doing with our study is we're trying to influence policy, and we've done that. So the bone health aspect, that new machine, the
Brilliant.
feasibility part that we've done, that's changing strategy. That's changing policy. Same in the dementia area. We've changed policy. We've got involved in the women's health strategy. So our data is being used. Now, a couple of years ago, our funding stream, we were funded through the Department of Health. That changed, and it went to the Department of Disability, DICE we call it. It's Disability,
Yeah,
Children, Equality and Inclusion. Um, so they're very interested in um, how we can influence policy. And I think if we influence practice, policy, and families, things will change and things will improve. So we now have developed a strategy with the department, the DICE, the Department of Inclusion, and we are looking specifically at policies that we can work on. So how does that impact on the study? Well, we have a lot of data collected. So what do we need to do next? How do we translate that and implement? So that's where we're going next. We're
brilliant.
looking at how can we implement our findings? What do we need? Say, for example, the physical activity. Do we need to develop a good educational program? What kind of a wraparound service can we develop from our study? Who do we work with? So one of the things I've done is I'm working with the national, I'm trying to think of the full title now.
Yeah,
It's the National Frailty Programme. And I'm developing with Deirdre Lang, who is the lead on that from the general side of things. I'm working with Deirdre and a whole community of practice. So the community of practice is made up of advanced nurse practitioners, physiotherapists, occupational therapists, dietitians. It's a huge group of us. And we're creating a frailty ID program based on the IDS-TILDA data. And
wow.
trying to, our target is to have it completed by the end of the year and start rolling this program out through the HSC by next February, and start educating carers and support workers, then move into educating families around the whole aspect of ageing and frailty. And that's just one small piece. There's loads of pieces like that happening. So
Brilliant.
that's where we're going next. The other thing then that the department were really interested in was, could we bring our age group down to see what was it like across the lifespan? And so we'll have to negotiate further funding, because that's a whole new tranche of a younger cohort. So
Very best
that,
of luck with that.
we're determined. I think people with intellectual disability deserve the
Of
best.
course they do.
That's what we're after.
Brilliant. We could talk to you for hours. It's a very
Thanks.
interesting study with some very good results compared to the first time we spoke to you. But for
It's
now, Eilish Burke, thank you so much for talking to us at Disability Matters.
lovely to talk to you, John. I was delighted. Take care.